what is the first thing you want to know?
Well, let's get this one right. Let's get it out of the way kind of right off the bat. I want to know why someone shouldn't start a newsletter.
Cool. So it's interesting. This is a good question, but I'm curious, why is that something you want to know? Because I know you and I both are very pro newsletter, obviously. So I'm just curious sort of what the impetus for the question was.
Yeah, I think a lot of people ask why they should. And I think you and I can come up with 100 reasons why people should.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to find kind of not a straw man case, but really the opposite for newsletters. Like what is the reason somebody shouldn't? And then there's probably not many, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts on why they shouldn't. And that kind of builds the case for why most people should, I think, like
Mhm.
almost in a reverse way. So I was just curious if there's any situations where you feel like there's no sense really in this person starting a newsletter. It's definitely not the best choice of how to use their time.
Sure. So it's funny. I'm going to give sort of two separate answers to this question. One is going to be my dodge the question answer, and the other will be my actual answer the question answer. So, my first thought about this is I'm really biased because the truth is I actually believe everyone should have a newsletter. And I don't even just mean like individual creator types. I mean, every business. I think they're incredibly powerful. And to me, a newsletter is essentially just a value delivery mechanism. And it's the best value delivery mechanism in terms of your ability to reach an audience and the intimacy in someone's inbox. And you're not beholden to social platforms and a million different reasons. So I personally feel like if you're trying to accomplish anything, it would be valuable for you to start and have a newsletter. But that said, I think it's important to also say here that a newsletter doesn't have to be what you think it is or what a lot of people think it is. And I think that's where a lot of times when I say, oh, everyone should have a newsletter, they go, why do I need a newsletter? I just make videos, or I just do this, or I sell widgets, or, whatever. And I think it's understanding my definition in some ways of what a newsletter is different than a lot of people's, especially people that are hesitant to start them, different than their assumptions. A newsletter does not have to be long. As you know, I have a daily newsletter that is literally, I think the one I sent a couple of days ago was 2 words. When you start thinking about what I really mean is you want a consistent email that you're able to deliver value to people. And when I say everyone should start a newsletter, it doesn't mean everyone should write this long form essay thing, right? What I mean is everyone should be thinking about how do I use email to deliver whatever value it is that I have to deliver to people, right? So in that context, I think it's very different. That's part of why I don't think there's really an excuse not to do it. Because I don't think you don't have to be a good writer. You don't have to have a ton of time. You don't have to have design skills. It doesn't have to be anything sort of fancy. It doesn't have to be super time consuming. And to be honest, it doesn't even have to be text. Like if you're someone who prefers video or audio, your quote unquote newsletter could be an email you send each week with a link to the YouTube video you post.
Right.
Or a link to the podcast, right? So I think that's really important when we have this conversation about who should have a newsletter or not have a newsletter, because there are so many preconceived notions about what a newsletter is. So that's my sort of dodge the question answer. Now I'll give you the head on, like, all right, yeah, but surely there's some people that should not actually have a newsletter. And I tried to think about it and sort of came up with like, kind of what I see as the red flags of people who start newsletters. I'm like, that's not going to work. Or you're starting it for maybe the wrong reasons, or you have assumptions. And I think those people, that's when I go like, you probably shouldn't be doing a newsletter because you have some misconceptions about what this is. So
Perfect.
The first one that I would say is don't start a newsletter if you're not interested in providing value to an audience, right? There is a big difference between in my mind, and as I define it, I think, and I think a lot of people get confused here. There's a big difference between a newsletter and email marketing. I think a lot of people, I see email marketing as something you do to extract value from an audience, and a newsletter is something you do to provide value to an audience, right? So if you're doing a newsletter solely because you want to sell more of your stuff, you should be doing email marketing, right? Not a newsletter. Email marketing can be done sporadically. Maybe you don't email people every week or every 2 weeks or every day or whatever. You do it when you have something to promote or sell. Because again, you're using email to extract value. A newsletter needs to be done consistently, at ideally at a set interval of time, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not interested in doing that, if you're not interested in sending emails that provide value, you just want to extract value, and you're not interested in emailing people consistently, then I would say don't do a newsletter.
Yeah.
Just do email marketing. Still think you should
Sure.
use email, but those things I think are very different. The other thing I would say is, and this one, some people are not going to love this one, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Perfect.
Don't start a newsletter if what you really want to do is write a diary, right?
Yeah.
I believe you can write about whatever you want. There is nothing wrong with doing that. And you can even publish it and you can even share it as a newsletter. All of that is fine. But if you are writing primarily for you and not to provide value to others, you should not expect to attract and grow an audience for it.
Right.
That misalignment causes so much frustration and problems. And that's what I mean by a diary, right? You see a lot of people are like, I want to write about whatever I want to write about, and I don't want to focus on this niche, and I want to sometimes send it whenever I want to send it. And this is an exercise for me. Great. Don't ask how to grow it. Like those are two separate things. That is an artistic hobby for you or whatever it is. Awesome. But if you're talking about a newsletter that's designed to grow or provide, create some sort of value, it has to be rooted in what you're providing to other people. So that would be another one where I would say, if you're just writing for yourself, you're welcome to publish it for anyone who wants to read it. But you just can't then have the expectations that it's going to be this huge successful thing, because you're not designing it for anyone. Like if the audience's wants and desires are secondary to your own, you cannot have the expectation that it's going to work and be successful. It might. Sometimes it catches on. People do stuff for themselves.
Yeah.
But so that to me would be another difference. And that's where I say it's like, you might as well do the same writing and not publish it.
Yeah.
Or publish it on your blog or whatever. So that would be another scenario where if it's really about you, maybe don't start a newsletter. And then the last thing I would say is, again, another sort of misconception, especially now these past couple of years where there's been this whole newsletter boom. Don't start a newsletter because you think it's going to be easy, you think it's going to be quick, or because it's hot right now. I'm amazed people that contact me and go, they see Morning Brew or The Hustle or all these people doing stuff, and they go, oh, I want to start a newsletter. And they don't really know why. They don't really want to start a newsletter. They just think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah. And
they might be right. I mean, this is the other part of it too. I say to people all the time, and I found this for myself over the years, there are opportunities everywhere. And just because you see an opportunity and you can succeed with it doesn't actually mean that you should pursue it, especially if it doesn't really align with what you want to do. Like starting a newsletter because it's the hot thing really rarely works well. So I think that would be another person where if you're not really excited to create the thing and you're just doing it because you sense there's an opportunity there, I might not say don't start it, but I would at least say maybe you should think twice before you start that newsletter.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So what do you think? What did I miss? You know this space well. Anything else? Who would you tell not to start one?
Well, yeah, I think the one scenario or a couple scenarios where maybe a personal kind of diary or journal style newsletter could work is if you have a very interesting, let's say, life or job that you can blog about or write about. I shouldn't say to use the word blog necessarily, but that you could write about and that people would be interested in. And it would have to be pretty unique, right? And something that maybe not a lot of people are exposed to. So I feel like in that circumstance you could, or if you were, mildly famous and people were just interested in you as a social, celebrity figure, whatever that might be, or influencer on some kind of platform, then I think you could maybe get away with something in that realm.
Yeah.
But for, the 99.5% of us who are not those things, it would be definitely ill-advised.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said. And actually, I should clarify that because I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with chronicling your life, your activities, your journey, your whatever, right? You're right.
Hmm.
That can be very effective. And even if you're not famous, right? Even if you're just starting out, the key is to understand I'm chronicling this and sharing this to help these other people,
Yeah.
not just because I feel like writing about it.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. And by the way, the obvious version of that is well, look, you and I have both written plenty about how we grow our newsletters. Like and how we do stuff. There's an
Hmm.
element of sort of personal journey there, but it's designed to help people that are interested in learning how to do that same thing. But even if you go the other direction of something that might seem completely frivolous, right? Like maybe it's just someone writing about, they just want to write stories about spending time with their kids each weekend, which doesn't seem as concrete or businessy as how to grow a newsletter.
Sure.
But if they're sharing those stories in the mind and with the approach that other parents are going to be able to read them and go, oh, you know what? I should do that with my kid.
Yeah.
Like that's a cool. So even it doesn't have to be business like. It can be very personal. It can be very, I don't want to say fluffy, but it can be very
Hmm.
like diary type thing. But the key is to keep in mind, okay, I'm sharing these personal experiences to help someone else, not just because I want to write them down. And, like, I
Yeah.
think if you like that newsletter, for example, a newsletter where every week you talk about the things you did with your kids and what you learned from them and et cetera, I could see as being very valuable to people.
Hmm.
If that same newsletter is one week, it's about here's what I did with my kids. And the next week it's here's what I had for lunch.
Yeah.
And the next week it's here's what I think about the election.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, where you start to get into diary territory of like, well, who is this actually helping? Because
Mhm.
it's sort of all over the place and free form and whatever.
Yeah.
Cool.
I agree.